She had exactly 5 seconds to choose. Apologize on her knees and scrub the stain with her bare hands, or step into that ring with his enforcer. Rose Lawson should have been terrified. Any rational person would have been. But standing there in that cathedral of crystal chandeliers and polished marble, surrounded by men in designer suits who wore violence like expensive cologne, all she could think was how badly she wanted to break Seo Jin-hyuk's cold, calculating mask. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. What they don't tell you is that sometimes it requires a left jab and a knockout punch to really drive your point home. Sometimes justice doesn't knock politely. It breaks down the door with bloodied knuckles and a brother's memory to avenge. This is the story of Rose Lawson, a woman who went from serving champagne to the most dangerous people in the city to becoming the one thing a Korean mafia boss never saw coming. A Golden Gloves champion who refused to stay down even when staying down would have kept her alive. Welcome back, my fierce hearts and midnight dreamers. Before we dive in, make sure you're subscribed, hit that like button, and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our little dark romance family stretch across cities, countries, and time zones. Every click, every comment, every bit of love you leave here helps us keep unraveling these dangerous love stories and high-stakes betrayals together. So find your quiet place, dim the lights, and get ready as we take you back to where it all began. Rose was 26 when she took the job at the Gilded Pearl. It was supposed to be reconnaissance, just a way to get inside the walls of the Korean crime syndicate that controlled half the city from the shadows. The venue had a reputation for being untouchable, the kind of place where reservations required blood connections and the secrets could bury careers. It seemed impossible to infiltrate. She knew exactly what she was walking into. On her first shift, the floor manager, a wiry man named Vincent Park whose paranoia radiated like heat, cornered her in the staff corridor before she even finished her orientation. His voice dropped to a whisper that sounded more like a prayer than a warning. Listen very carefully, Rose. There are rules here, non-negotiable rules. She nodded, her face perfectly neutral. She'd expected this. Had prepared for it. When the VIP suites are occupied, you don't enter unless explicitly summoned. You don't ask questions about the guests. You don't make direct eye contact unless they speak to you first. He paused, his fingers twitching as he adjusted his tie. And if Mr. Seo is present, you treat him like he's God himself. Understand? Mr. Seo. Mr. Seo, she repeated, her voice carefully measured. Vincent's jaw tightened. Just do exactly what I'm telling you, and you might survive this job. She didn't flinch, didn't show him the fury that burned beneath her skin. Because she hadn't come here to survive. She'd come here to hunt. Marcus didn't just die in prison. He was murdered there, beaten and stabbed in a fight that the official report called gang-related territorial violence. Everyone said he'd gotten involved with the wrong people. Everyone said he'd been dealing in information, playing dangerous games. But Rose knew her brother. Marcus wasn't a criminal. He was a kid who'd witnessed something he shouldn't have, something connected to the JBL crime syndicate that ran their empire from boardrooms and back alleys alike. The official report said he'd started the fight, that he'd been dirty all along. But Rose knew the truth. Someone framed him. Someone powerful enough to make the truth disappear. And the Gilded Pearl wasn't just an exclusive restaurant. It was the JBL's headquarters, their fortress, their command center disguised as five-star dining. Rose wasn't there to serve champagne. She was there to find the man who signed her brother's death warrant. 8 weeks into the job, she'd memorized every corner of the building. She knew which servers were true believers and which ones were just trying to pay rent. She knew the VIP suites were assigned by rank, that Suite 7 belonged to the man at the top. She knew the security cameras had blind spots near the wine cellar, that the kitchen staff rotated at midnight, that the real power moved through these halls after the last civilian guest left. She'd been patient,
disciplined,
invisible.
Tonight, that ended.
Suite 7 glowed with warm amber light when she pushed through the heavy doors, a tray of premium bottles balanced perfectly on her palm. The room was a masterclass in controlled luxury. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs the color of old money, a crystal chandelier that scattered light across the faces of men who killed with signatures instead of guns. They barely noticed her. To them, she was scenery, background noise, a pretty black woman in a burgundy vest who knew her place.
Perfect.
Let them underestimate her. She moved through the room with practiced grace, setting glasses down without sound, pouring liquor that cost more than her monthly rent. Her hands were steady. Her face was serene. Inside, her heart beat like a war drum. Because there, at the head of the table, sat Seo Jin-hyuk. She'd studied photographs, surveillance footage, grainy images captured by people who didn't live long enough to get better angles. But nothing prepared her for the reality of him. He was dangerous in the way beautiful things are dangerous, elegant, and lethal. His suit was midnight black, tailored so perfectly it moved like a second skin. His hair was styled back from a face that could have belonged to a young CEO or a runway model. All sharp jawlines and cold symmetry. But it was his eyes that made her fingers tighten on the tray. Dark, merciless, utterly empty of hesitation. This was the man who commanded the JBL's entire operation. The man whose orders destroyed families. The man who held the answers about what really happened to Marcus. He was discussing something with the man to his left, his voice low and controlled, each word precisely chosen. When Rose moved closer with the final bottle, a vintage soju sealed with gold foil, the kind served only when blood debts were settled or empires changed hands. She'd rehearsed this moment for weeks. Had calculated the angle, the timing, the exact amount of force needed to make it look accidental. The bottle slipped from her tray. Time slowed to a crawl. She watched the glass tumble through the air. Saw the amber liquid arc like liquid gold. Felt the cold splash hit her hands a split second before it drenched Seo Jin-hyuk's chest. The room went dead silent. Not the kind of silence that comes from shock. The kind that comes right before someone dies. The soju spread across his shirt like blood on silk, dark and irreversible. The scent of expensive alcohol filled the air, sharp and accusatory. Rose stepped back, her eyes widening in perfect manufactured horror, her hand flying to her mouth. Oh my God.
I'm so sorry.
I don't know how. His voice cut through her apology, like a blade through water. Stop. He stood slowly, his movements deliberate, his gaze locked on her with an intensity that felt like being caught in a spotlight. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. This was it, the moment she'd orchestrated. The moment that would either get her killed or get her inside his world. Seo Jin-hyuk tilted his head slightly, studying her like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Then his lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. You have 5 seconds to choose, he said, his voice silk over steel. Apologize on your knees and clean this stain with your bare hands, or step into that ring with my enforcer and prove you're worth more than your mistake. Rose's heart hammered against her ribs. Around them, the room held its collective breath. This was the moment, the point of no return. She'd spent 8 weeks being invisible. 8 weeks swallowing her rage. 8 weeks pretending to be small. She looked Seo Jin-hyuk dead in the eye, her chin lifting, her stance shifting into something he couldn't possibly recognize yet. I'll fight. The room erupted. Rose had memorized Marcus's autopsy report. 17 stab wounds. Blunt force trauma to the skull. defensive wounds on his palms that told the story of a man who'd fought to live. The official report called it gang violence, case closed, file sealed. But Marcus had called her 3 days before he died, his voice shaking with something between terror and rage. "Rose, I saw something. Something bad. If anything happens to me..." The line had gone dead. 2 days later, he was dead too. The Gilded Pearls application process was surprisingly easy for a place that laundered blood money through wine lists. Rose had scrubbed her social media, invented a backstory about needing work after her grandmother died, smiled through the interview like she didn't know exactly what kind of establishment this was. Vincent Park had hired her on the spot, desperate for servers who could keep their mouths shut and their heads down. He had no idea she'd spent 6 months training herself to be forgettable, to blend into expensive wallpaper. The first 2 weeks were hell by design. Vincent watched her like a corrections officer, waiting for her to slip up, to ask the wrong question, to look too long at the wrong face. The other servers kept their distance, their eyes hollow with the kind of exhaustion that comes from witnessing things you can never speak about. One girl, Lisa, had tried to warn her in the break room. "Just keep your head down and cash your checks. Don't try to be a hero here. Heroes end up in the harbor." Rose had nodded, playing the grateful rookie. Inside, she filed the information away. The harbor, that's where they disposed of problems. By week 3, she'd learned the rhythm of the place. Tuesdays were slow, locals only. Fridays, the VIP suites filled with businessmen who signed contracts in blood, if not ink. Saturdays belonged to Seo Jin-hyuk, when Suite 7 became the nerve center of an empire that stretched from shipping docks to city council chambers. She learned which security guards took smoke breaks at the same time every night, which delivery entrance had a camera blind spot for exactly 47 seconds. Which members of the kitchen staff were true believers and which ones were just trying to survive. She stole glances at the VIP guest logs when Vincent wasn't looking, photographed documents left carelessly on tables after midnight meetings, listened to conversations in Korean that they assumed she couldn't understand. She'd spent 4 months learning the language in secret, using apps with her earbuds in while she pretended to listen to music on the subway. Every phrase she caught was another piece of the puzzle. Every name was another thread leading back to Marcus. The abuse was constant but calculated. Vincent screaming at her for pouring wine from the wrong side. Guests snapping their fingers at her like she was a dog. Men in $1,000 suits letting their hands linger too long when she cleared their plates, testing her, seeing if she'd react. She never did. She smiled, apologized, made herself smaller. Each humiliation was gasoline on a fire she kept carefully banked. She'd learned patience in the boxing ring, learned that the fighter who stays calm always outlasts the one who burns hot and fast. By week 8, she had everything she needed. The security rotations, the hierarchy, the knowledge that Seo Jin-hyuk would be in Suite 7 tonight for a deal that required his personal touch. She'd earned Vincent's grudging trust through perfect subservience. She'd become invisible enough that the men with blood on their hands didn't even register her presence anymore. Tonight, she'd make them see her. Tonight, she'd spill the wine that would open every door she needed. And when Seo Jin-hyuk gave her the choice between humiliation and violence, she'd choose the one thing she'd been training for since she was 15 years old. She'd choose to fight. The vintage soju spread across Seo Jin-hyuk's chest like a declaration of war. Rose watched him stand, watched the amber liquid drip from his collar onto the imported Italian leather of his shoes, watched every man in the room reach for weapons they kept hidden under perfectly tailored jackets. The air crystallized with the promise of violence. This was the moment she'd orchestrated, the spark she'd needed to light the fuse. She kept her expression frozen in manufactured horror, her hand trembling just enough to sell the accident. Jin-hyuk's eyes locked onto hers with the intensity of a predator recognizing prey that had just done something impossible. Something deliberate. His voice cut through the silence like a blade through silk. You have 5 seconds to choose. Apologize on your knees and clean this stain with your bare hands, or step into that ring with my enforcer and prove your worth more than your mistake. The room held its collective breath. This was theater, Rose realized. A show Jin-hyuk performed to maintain dominance, to remind everyone in his empire what happened when you disrespected the king. He expected her to drop, to grovel, to cry. He expected her to be smart enough to choose survival over pride. Rose straightened her spine, pulled her shoulders back, and met his gaze without flinching. I'll fight. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across Jin-hyuk's face.
Surprise, maybe.
Or curiosity. Then his expression smoothed back into that beautiful, merciless mask. He gestured to one of his men, a mountain of a human being with a shaved head and neck tattoos that crawled up from his collar like serpents. Yongo, don't break her too badly. I want her conscious enough to scrub the floor afterward. The men laughed, that cruel sound of sharks scenting blood. They pushed back chairs, cleared a space in the center of the suite. Someone dimmed the chandelier. The room transformed into an arena, all that luxury suddenly feeling like a coliseum dressed in Armani. Yongo rolled his shoulders, his knuckles already wrapped in tape like he'd been expecting this kind of entertainment tonight. He probably had been. Men like Jin-hyuk always kept their enforcers ready for impromptu lessons in obedience. Rose untied her apron with steady hands, folded it carefully, set it on an empty chair. She pulled the tie from her hair, letting it fall loose around her shoulders before gathering it back into a tight, practical bun. The motion was automatic, muscle memory from 1,000 nights in gyms that smelled like sweat and dreams. She rolled her neck, heard it crack, felt that familiar calm settle over her like armor. Yongo smiled, the expression turning his face into something ugly. You sure about this, little girl? I've put down men twice your size. Rose slid into her stance, left foot forward, right foot back, weight distributed perfectly on the balls of her feet. Her hands came up, left guarding her face, right cocked by her ribs. It was a boxer stance, clean and classic, the kind earned through years of discipline. I'm sure. He came at her like a freight train, all power and no finesse, expecting to overwhelm her with sheer force. His first punch was a haymaker aimed at her head, telegraphed so obviously she could have dodged it blindfolded. Rose slipped left, felt the air displacement as his fist sailed past her ear, and drove her right straight into his solar plexus. The impact traveled up her arm, solid and satisfying. Yongo grunted, stumbled back half a step. The smile died on his face. The room went silent again, but this time the silence sang with tension instead of certainty. Rose didn't give him time to recover. She stepped in with a jab that snapped his head back, followed with a left hook to his floating rib that she felt crack under her knuckles. Yongo swung wild, trying to use his reach advantage, but she was already inside his guard, too close for those long arms to generate power. She worked his body like a speed bag, combinations drilled into her muscle memory until they were instinct. Jab, cross, hook. Slip, counter, pivot. He caught her once with a glancing blow to her shoulder that sent pain radiating down her arm, but it only sharpened her focus. Marcus had taught her that pain was just information, just your body telling you to adjust.
She adjusted.
Came in lower, drove an uppercut into Yongo's liver that folded him like cheap furniture. When he dropped his guard to protect his body, she rose up with a right cross that connected with his jaw in a percussion of bone on bone that echoed through the suite. Yongo went down hard, his head bouncing off the marble floor with a sound that made several men wince. He tried to get up, got to one knee before his body decided it was done. He collapsed onto his side, breathing hard, blood leaking from his split lip onto the pristine white marble. Rose stood over him, her chest heaving, her knuckles already swelling. She looked up at Seo Jin-hyuk, who was leaning back in his chair with his fingers steepled under his chin, his ruined shirt forgotten. He was watching her the way a jeweler watches a diamond that's just caught the light at an unexpected angle. "Golden gloves," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Three-time regional champion. You should have asked about my credentials before offering me the job." Jin-hyuk's smile was slow, dangerous, and genuinely amused. "Indeed, I should have." He stood, stepped around Yongo's groaning form, and closed the distance between them until he was close enough that she could smell his cologne mixing with the soju. "What's your name?" "Your real name." "Rose Lawson." "Well, Rose Lawson." His voice dropped to something intimate, something that felt like a secret shared in the dark. "You've just made yourself either very valuable or very dead.
Come with me."
Let's find out which. Jin-hyuk's penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a building that probably had its own secrets buried in the foundation. Rose expected dungeons, interrogation rooms, the kind of places where people who embarrassed crime bosses went to disappear. Instead, she got floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city that glittered like broken glass, minimalist furniture that probably cost more than her entire life, and silence, so complete it felt like standing inside a held breath. He led her through the space without speaking, past abstract art that might have been priceless or might have been blood spatter depending on your perspective, into a bathroom that looked like it belonged in a luxury spa. Marble everywhere, gold fixtures, a medicine cabinet that opened to reveal supplies that could stock a small hospital. He gestured to the counter. "Sit." Rose's knuckles were split, already purpling with bruises that would hurt worse tomorrow. Her shoulder throbbed, where Yongo had landed that one good hit. She should have been terrified, should have been planning her escape. Instead, she watched Jin-hyuk roll up his ruined sleeves and run warm water over a clean cloth with a kind of careful precision that didn't match his reputation. "You're not going to kill me," she said. It wasn't a question.
"No."
He wrung out the cloth, turned to face her. Up close, without the audience of dangerous men, he looked younger than she'd expected. Tired in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. "If I wanted you dead, you'd already be bleeding out in Suite 7. Yongo would have seen to it, once he woke up. He took her hand without asking permission, began cleaning the blood from her knuckles with a gentleness that felt obscene coming from a man who ordered executions before breakfast. Rose watched his face, looking for the trap, the angle, the moment when mercy would transform into cruelty. It didn't come. "Why did you really spill that drink?" His voice was quiet, conversational, like they were discussing the weather instead of her attempted infiltration of his criminal empire. Rose could have lied, should have lied, but something in his touch, in the way he handled her damaged hands like they mattered, made her choose truth instead. "My brother Marcus. He died in prison 8 months ago. 17 stab wounds. They said it was gang violence, but Marcus wasn't in a gang. He was a graphic designer who saw something he shouldn't have, something connected to the JBL. Jin-hyuk's hands stilled on hers. "Marcus Lawson." Her heart stopped. "You know that name?" "I know a lot of names. People who've been killed on orders that passed through my organization." He reached for antiseptic, began dabbing it on her cuts with the same careful attention. "I didn't give that particular order, if that's what you're asking. But someone in my empire did." "Who?" "That's the question, isn't it?" He finished with her hands, moved to examine her shoulder, fingers probing gently for damage. She hissed when he found the worst of it. I run an organization of over 300 people. I sign off on deals, territory disputes, shipments. But the individual kill orders, the day-to-day violence, that gets delegated, filtered through advisors, enforcers, people I'm supposed to trust. Rose grabbed his wrist, forced him to look at her. Then help me find out who. You have access to everything. Records, files, the people who would know. Jin-hyuk laughed, but it was a hollow sound, brittle as breaking ice. I don't have access to anything. Not really. You want to know the truth about running a crime empire, Rose? I'm a prisoner in my own kingdom. He pulled away from her, walked to the window, stared out at the city, like he was looking at a cage he couldn't escape. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of secrets that had been crushing him for too long. My father built the JBL, turned it from a street gang into a multinational enterprise. But at the end, he had dementia, didn't know his own name, thought I was his brother, got violent when anyone tried to help him. One night, he got hold of a gun, nearly killed 3 of our people before I stopped him. Rose watched his reflection in the glass, saw the pain etched into every line of his face. I made a choice, gave him an overdose of his medication, made it look like his heart finally gave out. It was mercy, Rose. The kindest thing I could do for a man who taught me everything. He turned to face her, and his eyes were empty of everything except exhaustion. My mother found out. Madam Park. She has proof. Video footage from the security cameras I didn't know existed. And she's been using it to control me ever since. Every decision I make runs through her. Every move I try to make gets vetoed. I'm a king on a leash, and she holds the other end. The pieces clicked into place. The careful distance she'd observed between Jin-hyuk and his inner circle. The way decisions at the Gilded Pearl seemed to come from somewhere else. She's the real power. She's the real power, he confirmed. And as long as she has that evidence, I'll never be free. I'll never be able to run this empire the way it needs to be run. I'll never be able to find out which of my people are actually loyal and which ones answer to her. Rose slid off the counter, moved to stand beside him at the window. 2 people trapped by different chains, staring at the same city. So we help each other. I help you destroy the blackmail. You help me find Marcus's killer. We both get what we need. Jin-hyuk studied her for a long moment, weighing odds, calculating risks, seeing angles she probably couldn't imagine. Then he extended his hand. Partners? Rose took it, felt the strength in his grip, the calluses that said he wasn't just a man who gave orders, but one who knew how to fight his own battles. Partners. But when we find who killed Marcus, I get to be the one who makes them pay.
Deal.
His smile was sharp as a knife's edge. Welcome to the Empire, Rose Lawson. Let's burn it down and build it back better. The first time Jin-hyuk kissed her, they were reviewing security footage of Madam Park's estate, looking for weaknesses in a fortress that had been designed to be impenetrable. Rose had pointed out a blind spot near the East Wing service entrance when his hand covered hers on the keyboard. She'd looked up, found his face inches from hers, and realized that somewhere between planning a heist and trading stories about the people they'd lost, they'd crossed a line neither of them had acknowledged. This is a bad idea, she whispered, but she didn't pull away. Everything about this is a bad idea. His lips brushed hers, soft at first, then deeper, like he was trying to taste something he'd been denying himself for too long. What's one more? They fell into each other the way broken things tend to find their matching pieces. Late nights planning the heist turned into early mornings tangled in sheets that cost more than Rose's first car. He told her about growing up in his father's shadow, learning that love in the JBL came with conditions and expiration dates. She told him about teaching Marcus to throw a jab in their mother's backyard, how he'd laughed when she knocked him flat the first time. They shared their darkness like sacred wine, each sip revealing another scar, another reason why they were both so comfortable dancing with violence. Jin Hyuk's advisor, Elias Thorne, was a study in controlled ambition. British accent polished at Oxford, suits that whispered old money, and eyes that calculated odds faster than most people breathed. Rose didn't trust him on instinct, but Jin Hyuk vouched for him with the kind of certainty that came from years of relying on someone to keep you alive. Elias has been with me since the beginning. If anyone can get us into that vault, it's him. They met in a private room at a restaurant that served as neutral territory, the kind of place where deals were made over $1,500 bottles of wine. Elias listened to their plan with the focused attention of a surgeon studying an impossible operation, his fingers steepled under his chin. When Jin Hyuk finished explaining about the blackmail, about needing to destroy Madame Park's leverage, Elias nodded slowly. Madame Park's birthday gala. 3 weeks from now. She'll have 200 guests, most of them politicians, judges, people she owns. His accent turned each word into something clinical, precise. Security will be split between managing the party and protecting the vault. The files are kept in a biometric safe in the wine cellar. Fingerprint and retinal scan, backup generator in case of power failure. Rose leaned forward. Can we bypass it? Not bypass. Override. Elias pulled out a tablet, began sketching a layout. Madame Park has a personal assistant, a woman named Sophia Chun who has emergency access codes. We get those codes. We can manually override the biometric system for exactly 90 seconds before the backup alarm triggers. How do we get the codes? Jin Hyuk asked. Elias smiled, thin and calculated. We recruit Miss Chun. She's been skimming from the household accounts for 2 years. I have proof. We give her a choice. Help us, or we give Madame Park the evidence of her theft. It was exactly the kind of leverage Rose was learning to expect in this world. Everyone had a pressure point. Everyone could be bought or broken. The next 3 weeks became a blur of preparation. Jin Hyuk taught Rose the layout of his mother's estate, walking her through blueprints until she could navigate the floor plan blindfolded. They practiced the timing, synchronized their movements until they could communicate with looks instead of words. Elias handled the logistics, acquiring fake credentials for the catering company, bribing the security consultant to provide them with the current camera positions, turning Sophia Chun from loyal assistant into reluctant accomplice. Rose trained harder than she had for any fight, running the route from the party to the vault until her legs burned, practicing picking locks on similar models to the wine cellar door, learning to move through spaces like she belonged there. Jin Hyuk watched her work with an intensity that made her skin warm, and afterward he'd pull her into the shower, wash the sweat from her skin like it was a ritual, trace the bruises blooming on her knuckles from hitting the heavy bag. You're getting stronger, he murmured against her neck one night, water cascading over both of them. I have to be. This isn't a boxing ring with rules and referees. She turned in his arms, cupped his face with hands that were becoming weapons. This is your life we're stealing back. Our life, he corrected, and kissed her like they had all the time in the world instead of 3 days before they walked into the trap they were building. The night before the heist, they didn't train. Jin Hyuk took her to the roof of his building, where the city spread out below them like a kingdom waiting to be claimed. He poured expensive whiskey into crystal glasses, handed her one, and raised his in a toast. To bad ideas and worse company. Rose clinked her glass against his. To finding what we've lost, and taking what we're owed. He drank, pulled her close, and they stood there wrapped in each other while the city below pulsed with lives that had no idea what was coming. Tomorrow they'd steal into Madame Park's fortress. Tomorrow they'd risk everything on 90 seconds and a plan that depended on too many variables. Tomorrow they'd either break free or burn together. Tonight, they just held on to each other, like the world wasn't waiting to tear them apart. Madam Park's estate looked like something out of a fairy tale written by someone who understood that all the best stories ended in blood. White marble columns, gardens lit with thousands of tiny lights, guests in designer gowns and tuxedos who traded political favors like currency. Rose wore a black dress borrowed from Jin-hyuk's closet that probably cost more than her entire year's salary at the Gilded Pearl, her hair swept up in an elegant style that hid the small earpiece connecting her to him. She moved through the crowd with a champagne flute she never sipped from, just another beautiful decoration in a room full of beautiful, dangerous people. Jin-hyuk worked the party like he'd been born to it, shaking hands with men who laundered money through their legitimate businesses, kissing the cheeks of women who ran drug operations out of their boutiques. His mother held court near the grand staircase, a woman in her 60s who wore power like other people wore perfume. She watched her son with eyes that missed nothing, and Rose felt the weight of that gaze like a physical thing. Sophia's in position. Elias's voice came through the earpiece, smooth as expensive liquor. Wine cellar access in 3 minutes. Rose caught Jin-hyuk's eye across the room. He excused himself from a conversation with a city councilman, drifted toward the hallway that led to the East Wing. She followed at a distance, heart hammering against her ribs. This was it. The moment that would either free them or destroy them. The wine cellar entrance was hidden behind a door that looked like decorative paneling. Sophia Chin stood there with a tablet, her hands shaking as she entered the override codes. 90 seconds once you're inside. The backup alarm is silent, so you won't know when security's been notified. Please just get what you need and get out. The vault door hissed open, revealing a climate-controlled room lined with filing cabinets and a safe that looked like it could survive a nuclear blast. Rose moved immediately to the filing system while Jin-hyuk went for the safe containing the blackmail footage. Her fingers flew through the alphabetized folders, past names of politicians, judges, business leaders who'd been compromised. She found the L section, pulled the drawer, and there it was. Lawson Marcus. She opened the file with hands that wanted to shake, but didn't. Prison transfer orders. Witness protection rejection. Cell assignment. And there, at the bottom of the kill order, a signature in black ink that made her blood turn to ice. Elias Thorne. Authorization code ET 7739. Jin-hyuk. Her voice came out strangled. Elias signed Marcus's death warrant. He turned from the safe, the blackmail files clutched in his hand, his face going pale. That's not possible. He's been loyal. The vault door slammed shut with the finality of a coffin lid closing. The locks engaged with mechanical precision, sealing them inside. Through the small reinforced window, Elias Thorne appeared, his expression no longer calculating but triumphant. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. His voice came through the intercom, distorted by static but perfectly clear in its intent. Well, actually, I'm not sorry at all. This worked out rather perfectly. Jin-hyuk lunged for the door, pounded on the reinforced steel. Elias, open this door now. I don't think I will. Elias held up his phone, showed them a detonator app with a timer counting down from 10 minutes. You see, I've spent 5 years building my own network inside the JBL. Your father trusted me, Jin-hyuk. Gave me access to everything, including the authority to eliminate problems like Marcus Lawson when they witnessed transactions they shouldn't have. Rose felt rage crystallize in her chest, sharp and cold as a blade. You killed my brother. I did what needed to be done, just like I'm doing now. Elias paced in front of the window like a professor delivering a lecture. Madam Park has been weak, clinging to control through blackmail instead of real power. And you, Jin-hyuk, you're too soft. too concerned with honor and mercy. The JBL needs a leader who understands that empires are built on ruthlessness, not sentiment. So you blow us up and take over? Jin-hyuk's voice was deadly calm, the kind of calm that came right before violence. My mother will never accept you. Your mother will have no choice. The explosion will destroy the blackmail files along with both of you. I'll comfort her in her grief, help her through the tragedy of losing her only son. And within 6 months, she'll retire, broken by loss, and leave the empire to the only person she is left to trust. Elias's smile was poison wrapped in charm. Me. Rose scanned the vault, looking for weaknesses, exits, anything they could use. The timer on Elias's phone showed 8 minutes remaining. There's a manual override. Every vault has one for emergencies, which requires a code only I have now. Elias tapped the phone. I took the liberty of changing it this morning. Goodbye, Jin-hyuk. Goodbye, Rose. Thank you for making this so easy. He turned to walk away, and through the small window, they watched him disappear down the corridor. The timer counted down with mechanical indifference. 7 minutes, 43 seconds. 7 minutes, 42 seconds. Around them, the vault felt like a tomb waiting to be sealed permanently. Jin-hyuk pulled Rose close, his forehead pressed against hers. I'm sorry. I brought you into this. I trusted him. We both did. She pulled back, grabbed his face, forced him to focus. But we're not dead yet. There has to be a way out. We just have to find it. They had 7 minutes to prove her right. Rose's mind raced through everything she'd learned in 8 weeks at the Gilded Pearl, every conversation she'd overheard, every system she'd studied. Vaults had redundancies. Fire codes required emergency exits. There had to be something Elias missed, some weakness in his perfect plan born from the arrogance of men who thought they were smarter than everyone else. 6 minutes. The timer mocked them with its steady countdown. The ventilation system, she said, pointing to the grate near the ceiling. Climate control for the wine collection. It has to vent somewhere. Jin-hyuk was already moving, dragging a filing cabinet under the grate. Too small. We'd never fit through. Not us. The manual override has to have physical access for fire safety. If we can trace the ventilation to the mechanical room. She climbed onto the cabinet, started unscrewing the grate with the edge of a letter opener from one of the files. Her hands worked frantically, sweat beading on her forehead. 5 minutes 30 seconds. The grate came free. Rose shoved her arm into the duct, felt along the metal surface until her fingers found what she was looking for. A pipe running parallel to the ventilation. She followed it with her hand, tracing the direction until it disappeared into the wall behind a rack of wine bottles worth more than a small house.
Here.
Help me move this. They hauled the wine rack away from the wall, bottles crashing to the floor in an explosion of glass and liquid that smelled like money burning. Behind it, set into the concrete, was a small access panel with a manual wheel lock. Rose grabbed it with both hands, threw her weight into turning it. Nothing. Jin-hyuk added his strength to hers, muscles straining, and slowly, grudgingly, the wheel began to move. For minutes. The panel swung open, revealing a cramped maintenance corridor lined with pipes and electrical conduits. No time to think about what else might be wrong, what other traps Elias had set. Rose squeezed through first, Jin-hyuk right behind her, pulling the blackmail files through the narrow opening. They crawled through darkness that smelled like copper and old concrete, following the corridor as it angled upward. Behind them, they could hear the muffled sounds of the party continuing, oblivious to the bomb ticking in the wine cellar. The corridor ended at a ladder leading to a service hatch. Rose climbed fast, shoved the hatch open, and found herself in a maintenance shed behind the estate's east garden. She pulled Jin-hyuk through just as the night exploded behind them. The blast shook the ground like an earthquake, shattering windows across the east wing. Fire bloomed from the wine cellar entrance, black smoke pouring into the perfect night. Screams erupted from the party as guests stampeded toward exits. Alarms shrieked. Security guards poured out of the house, shouting into radios. Rose and Jin-hyuk ran through the chaos, two more panicked guests fleeing a disaster. They made it to the garden perimeter when Rose spotted him. Elias, standing near the main gate with a phone to his ear, his face a mask of calculated concern as he directed security teams. Their eyes met across 30 yards of manicured lawn. His expression shifted from shock to rage in a heartbeat. He ended the call, started moving toward them, hand reaching inside his jacket for a weapon that Rose knew would be there. But they were already running, cutting through a gap in the hedge line that maintenance used, sprinting toward the service road, where they'd stashed a backup car. "Stop them." Elias's voice cut through the chaos. "Those two started the fire. Stop them." Security guards turned, spotted them, began pursuit. Rose's lungs burned, but she pushed harder, Jin-hyuk matching her pace. They reached the car, a nondescript sedan that wouldn't draw attention. Jin-hyuk gunned the engine before Rose even had her door closed, tires squealing as they shot down the service road. In the rear-view mirror, the estate burned. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. They'd have minutes before the entire area was locked down, before Elias convinced everyone that they were the terrorists, the traitors, the ones who'd tried to murder Madame Park's guests. "He planned this perfectly," Jin-hyuk said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The heist, the explosion, positioning himself as the hero who tried to stop us. We played right into his hands. Rose clutched Marcus's file against her chest, the evidence that Elias had murdered her brother, now the only proof they had of his treachery. "He didn't just play us. He played your mother too. Used her blackmail to control you, used our heist to eliminate both obstacles at once. With us dead and the blackmail destroyed, he'd be the only one left standing. Except we're not dead." Jin-hyuk took a hard turn onto a highway heading out of the city. "Which means he's exposed. He showed his hand too early. He'll come after us harder now. Use every resource he has to hunt us down before we can expose him." Rose watched the city, lights blur past. "We need allies. People loyal to you, not him." "Yongo." The name came out like a prayer. "He owes you his respect after that fight. And he's never trusted Elias. Always thought he was too smooth, too perfect." They drove into the darkness, two fugitives with a dead brother's file and blackmail footage, running from a traitor who'd spent 5 years building an empire inside an empire. The game had changed. Now they weren't just stealing freedom. They were fighting for survival. And Rose Lawson had never lost a fight she was willing to die for. The safe house was a warehouse in the industrial district where the JBL stored shipments that customs would never see. Concrete floors stained with decades of questionable business, flickering fluorescent lights that hummed like dying insects, and the smell of motor oil mixed with something darker. Rose had never imagined she'd be planning a counter-coup in a place that looked like where hope went to die, but here they were. Fugitives in their own city, hunted by a man who'd spent 5 years preparing for this exact moment. Jin-hyuk made the call on a burner phone, his voice tight with tension. "Yongo, it's me. I need you to listen very carefully and decide if you're loyal to the JBL or loyal to Elias Thorne." Rose watched him pace, the blackmail files and Marcus's kill order spread across a card table like evidence in a trial where they were both defendant and prosecutor. She could hear Yongo's voice through the phone, muffled but agitated, asking questions that Jin-hyuk answered with the efficiency of a man who knew he had one chance to make this work. Elias set the explosion. He tried to kill me and frame Rose. He's been building his own network inside the organization for years, signing kill orders without authorization, positioning himself to take over. Jin-hyuk paused. Let that sink in. I have proof. Marcus Lawson's file with Elias's signature. I need you to bring anyone you trust who's still loyal to the real JBL, not whatever empire Elias is trying to build. You have 2 hours. He ended the call, looked at Rose with eyes that held equal parts hope and resignation. Now we wait and see if I'm still a king or just a man with a target on his back. 90 minutes later, the warehouse door opened. Yongo entered first, his face still showing the fading bruises from their fight, followed by 6 men Rose recognized from the Gilded Pearl. Enforcers, drivers, soldiers who'd served under Jin-hyuk's father before Elias had even arrived. They looked at their boss with expressions caught between confusion and anger, waiting for an explanation that made sense of the chaos engulfing their organization. Jin-hyuk didn't waste time with pleasantries. He laid out everything. His father's mercy killing, Madame Park's blackmail, Elias's betrayal, Marcus Lawson's murder. The explosion that was meant to eliminate them both and clear Elias's path to power. He showed them the files, let them see the evidence with their own eyes, let them understand that the empire they'd served was being stolen from within. Yongo picked up Marcus's kill order, studied the signature, his jaw tightening. I never trusted that British bastard. Too clean. Too smart. Men like that don't get their hands dirty until they're sure they won't get caught. He looked at Rose, respect in his eyes that hadn't been there in Suite 7. Your brother saw something he shouldn't have? A weapons deal with a terrorist cell. Marcus was designing promotional materials for what he thought was a legitimate shipping company. Found files on a shared drive that showed the real cargo. Rose's voice was steady, but her hands were clenched into fists. Elias couldn't risk him going to the FBI, so he had him transferred to a prison where the JBL had connections. Made it look like gang violence. One of the other men, a driver named Chun who'd been with the organization for 20 years, shook his head. Elias has half the operation convinced you're the traitors. Says you tried to assassinate Madame Park, steal the empire. He's got the police looking for you, got judges signing warrants. How do we fight that? We don't fight it with lawyers and evidence. Rose stood, moved to the center of the warehouse where the light was brightest. 7 men watched her, these soldiers who wore violence like a uniform, and she felt something shift inside her. Not fear. Not hesitation.
Certainty.
We fight it the way empires have always changed hands. We take it back by force. Jin-hyuk moved to stand beside her, his hand finding hers. Elias is hosting an engagement party at my penthouse tomorrow night. He's already moving into my home, claiming the throne before my body's even cold. He'll have his loyalists there, the people he's been cultivating for years. But he'll also be exposed, celebrating his victory before he's truly won it. We crashed the party, Rose continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd fought her way through every obstacle life had thrown at her. We show everyone that we're alive. We show them the proof of Elias's betrayal. And we take back what's ours. Yongo grinned, the expression turning his battered face into something dangerous. A raid on the penthouse. I like it.
Direct.
Bloody. Sends the right message. It's suicide, Chen said, but he was smiling too. Security will be everywhere. Elias's people will be armed and ready. Then we'll have to be faster. Rose looked at each of them in turn. These men who'd served Jin-hyuk's family, who understood that loyalty was currency in a world where everything else could be bought. I'm not asking you to follow us because you have to. I'm asking because this is the moment you decide what kind of empire you want to serve. One built on betrayal and backstabbing, or one built on real strength and honor. The warehouse went silent. Then Yongo stepped forward, dropped to one knee in a gesture that looked medieval and perfect. I serve the real king. And his queen. One by one, the others knelt. 7 soldiers pledging loyalty not to a crown, but to the people willing to fight for it. Rose felt the weight of their allegiance settle on her shoulders like a mantle she'd never asked for, but had somehow earned through blood and determination. Jin-hyuk squeezed her hand. Welcome to the Empire, my queen. Tomorrow we take it back. The penthouse glowed with victory that hadn't been earned. Crystal champagne flutes clinked in celebration, men in expensive suits laughed at jokes that probably weren't funny, and at the center of it all stood Elias Thorne with a woman on his arm who looked like she'd been hired for the occasion. He was announcing his engagement, consolidating power through the illusion of stability, showing the JBL's leadership that he was a man who built futures, not just destroyed obstacles. Rose watched through the scope of the surveillance equipment Yongo had acquired, her finger tracing the layout one more time. They'd come in through the service elevator, the same route she'd mapped during those 8 weeks at the Gilded Pearl. Jin-hyuk's penthouse had been designed with security in mind, but he knew every weakness because he'd created them. Secret exits for emergencies. Blind spots in the camera coverage. Access points that Elias hadn't thought to change because he'd been too busy celebrating his coup. 2 minutes, Jin-hyuk said, checking the pistol at his hip. Around them in the parking garage, Yongo and the others checked their own weapons with the efficiency of men who'd done this kind of work their entire lives. Elias will have at least 20 people loyal to him. We need to move fast, hit hard, and get to him before he can fortify his position. Rose cracked her knuckles, felt the familiar calm settle over her. This wasn't a boxing ring with rules and referees. This was war dressed up as justice. I want Elias. When it comes down to it, he's mine. Jin-hyuk nodded, pressed his forehead to hers for one brief moment. Then he's yours. Let's take back our home. They moved like shadows through the service corridor, Yongo in the lead with 2 men clearing the route. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt like descending into battle, that strange crystallized moment before violence where time moved differently. Rose's heart beat steady as a metronome. Marcus's face flashed in her memory. 17 stab wounds. A kill order signed by the man currently toasting his own brilliance. The elevator doors opened onto chaos they'd orchestrated. Jin-hyuk stepped out first, and every head in the room turned. The celebration died like someone had cut the music with a knife. Elias's champagne flute stopped halfway to his lips, his face draining of color as he stared at the dead man walking toward him. Surprise, Jin-hyuk said, his voice carrying across the stunned silence. Did you really think a little explosion would stop me? Elias recovered fast, his expression shifting from shock to calculation. Security. These are the terrorists who tried to kill Madam Park. Stop them. The room erupted. Elias's loyalists reached for weapons while Yongo and the others poured into the penthouse behind Rose and Jin-hyuk. The fight exploded like a grenade in an opera house. All that elegance and luxury transformed into a battlefield. Glass shattered. Furniture splintered. Men grappled and punched and bled on marble floors that had cost more than most people's homes. Rose moved through the chaos with singular focus, her eyes locked on Elias as he backed toward the far exit. He pulled a pistol from inside his jacket, aimed it at Jin-hyuk. She was already moving, closing the distance faster than he expected, her hand striking his wrist in a practiced disarm that sent the gun skittering across the floor. Elias's eyes widened with recognition. He'd underestimated her. Again. You killed my brother, she said, her voice cold as winter. You signed the order like it was nothing. Like his life didn't matter. Elias tried to run. She caught him with a jab that snapped his head back, followed with a cross that shattered his perfect nose. He stumbled, blood pouring down his face, ruining his expensive shirt. Around them the fight raged, but Rose's world had narrowed to just this moment, just this man who'd taken everything from her. He swung at her wildly, no technique, just desperation. She slipped the punch easily, drove an uppercut into his ribs that cracked bone. He gasped, tried to double over, but she grabbed his collar and hauled him upright. Another jab, another cross. She was systematic, methodical, breaking him piece by piece the way he'd broken her family. "Please," he choked out, his face a mess of blood and fear. "I was just following orders. Your brother was a liability." Rose's hook caught him on the temple, and his legs gave out. He collapsed to his knees, swaying, barely conscious. She stood over him, her knuckles split and bleeding, her chest heaving with exertion and rage that had finally found its target. Jin-hyuk appeared beside her, having dealt with his own opponents. The fight was ending, Elias's loyalists either subdued or fled. Yongo was zip-tying prisoners while Chun secured the exits. The penthouse looked like a war zone, but it was theirs again. "We could kill him now," Rose said, looking down at the man who'd orchestrated so much death. "End it fast."
No.
Jin-hyuk's voice was hard as steel. Fast as mercy. Elias doesn't get mercy. He gets to understand exactly what it feels like to wait for death, knowing it's coming but not when. He gestured to Yongo. "Take him to the warehouse. Make sure he stays alive and conscious. We'll deal with him properly when this is finished." Yongo hauled Elias up like he weighed nothing, dragged him toward the service elevator. Elias's eyes met Rose's one last time, and she saw the understanding dawn there. He'd lost everything. His coup, his future, his life. And he'd have to live with that knowledge until they decided he'd suffered enough. Rose turned to Jin-hyuk, saw her own satisfaction reflected in his face. "One more piece to move. Your mother." "One more piece," he agreed. "Let's finish this." Madame Park's wine cellar had been rebuilt after the explosion, the charred walls replaced with new stone, the temperature controls restored to preserve bottles that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. She sat in the center of the room in a leather chair that looked like a throne, surrounded by the ruins of her blackmail empire. The files were gone. The leverage she'd held over her son for 5 years had burned to ash. She was still powerful, still dangerous, but she was also alone. Rose and Jin-hyuk descended the stairs together, and Madame Park's eyes tracked them with the cold assessment of a woman who'd built an empire through calculated cruelty. She looked older than she had at the party, the stress of losing control etched into lines around her mouth. But her voice was steady when she spoke in Korean, each word precisely chosen. "You've made quite a mess of my organization." "Your organization?" Jin-hyuk replied in English, forcing her to meet him on his terms. "It was Father's organization. You just held it hostage. I kept it alive. I kept you in line when your mercy would have destroyed everything we built." She gestured to Rose with barely concealed contempt. "And now you bring this woman, this outsider, into our family business. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Rose stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned her place through blood and determination. "I know exactly what we've done. We exposed Elias Thorne as a traitor who is stealing your empire from under your nose. We saved the JBL from a coup you were too blind to see coming. And we took back control from a woman who thought manipulation was the same thing as leadership." Madame Park's face tightened, but she didn't rise to the bait.
She was too smart for that.
"You have the blackmail files. You've won this round. What do you want? My blessing? My surrender? We want you to retire. Jin-hyuk's voice was final as a door closing. Announce that you're stepping down due to health concerns. Hand over operational control to me. You can keep your house, your money, your comfortable life. But the JBL belongs to us now. The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of resentment and control finally shifting hands. Madam Park looked at her son, really looked at him, and seemed to see for the first time that he'd become something she couldn't dominate. Something stronger than her blackmail, harder than her manipulation. And if I refuse? Rose pulled out her phone, showed Madam Park a video of Elias confessing everything in the warehouse, his face bruised and broken, admitting to the unauthorized kills, the coup attempt, the evidence of his treachery that implicated anyone who'd worked with him, including advisors who'd helped him without Madam Park's knowledge. Then we release this to every family head in the JBL. Let them decide what should happen to a leader who lost control so completely that a traitor operated freely for 5 years. How long do you think you'd survive their judgment? Madam Park's hands clenched on the arms of her chair. She'd been outmaneuvered, outplayed by her own son and the woman she dismissed as irrelevant. The realization settled over her face like age catching up all at once. I'll make the announcement next week. Her voice was bitter but resigned. But understand this. You may have won the empire, but empires always consume their rulers eventually. You'll learn that lesson the hard way. Maybe, Jin-hyuk said. But at least we'll learn it together, on our own terms. They left her there in the wine cellar, surrounded by expensive bottles and expensive regrets. The empire was theirs now, for better or worse. 3 months later, Rose Lawson became Rose Seo in a private ceremony that was more strategic alliance than romance, though anyone watching could see the way they looked at each other said otherwise. The wedding was small, intimate, witnessed only by the soldiers who'd fought to put them on the throne. Yongo stood as best man, still faintly bemused that the waitress who'd knocked him out was now his queen. The execution came 2 days after the wedding. They brought Elias to the warehouse where they'd planned their counterattack, where he'd spent 3 months in a cell understanding exactly how thoroughly he'd lost. Rose and Jin-hyuk stood before him together, united in judgment. Any last words? Jin-hyuk asked. Elias looked at Rose, his face hollow with the knowledge of his failure. Your brother never stopped fighting. Even at the end. He died with your name on his lips. Rose felt the words like a blade, but she didn't flinch. Then this is for him. Jin-hyuk handed her the pistol. She'd never killed anyone before, never crossed that final line that separated fighter from executioner. But Marcus deserved this. Deserved to know his death had been answered. She raised the gun, aimed at the man who'd signed her brother's death warrant, and pulled the trigger. The sound echoed in the warehouse like thunder. Elias slumped forward, finally released from the waiting. Rose felt nothing but a hollow kind of peace, the weight of vengeance finally satisfied. That night, they stood on the roof of Jin-hyuk's penthouse, the city spread below them like a kingdom made of light and shadow. Rose leaned against the railing, Jin-hyuk's arms wrapped around her from behind, both of them surveying the empire they'd won through blood and determination. Do you think we'll survive this? She asked quietly. Running an empire built on violence. I don't know. His voice was honest in the darkness. But I know we'll survive it together. King and queen. Partners until the end. Rose turned in his arms, kissed him with the certainty of someone who'd fought for every inch of ground she'd gained. Below them, the city pulsed with lives that had no idea who ruled from these heights. And that was fine. Let them be ignorant. Let them live in the light while she and Jin-hyuk controlled the shadows. They'd earned this crown through blood and battle. And they'd hold it the same way, together, until the empire consumed them or they consumed it first. the king and queen of the Shadow Clan, overlooking their kingdom, ready for whatever came next. And there you have it, my fierce hearts and midnight dreamers. The story of Rose Lawson, a woman who walked into hell wearing a waitress uniform and walked out wearing a crown. A woman who proved that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the room isn't the man with the gun or the empire behind him. It's the woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Rose didn't ask for permission to take her seat at that table. She didn't wait for someone to hand her power wrapped in a pretty bow.
She fought for it,
Bled for it, broke every rule, and crossed every line until the empire had no choice but to recognize her as its queen. Because that's what it takes sometimes. Not patience, not politeness, not waiting your turn, but the courage to step into that ring when everyone expects you to kneel. This story is about more than revenge and romance, though we got plenty of both. It's about transformation. About a woman who went from serving champagne to the powerful to becoming the power itself. It's about refusing to stay small in a world that demands you shrink. It's about looking at the person who destroyed everything you loved and saying, "You made a mistake, and now you're going to pay for it." We all have our own empires to conquer, don't we? Maybe yours isn't a crime syndicate. Maybe it's a career that keeps overlooking you. A relationship that keeps diminishing you. A dream that everyone says is impossible. But the principle is the same. You can apologize and scrub the stain, or you can step into that ring and prove what you're really made of.
Rose chose the ring.
And in the end, she didn't just win the fight. She won the kingdom. Now here's what I need from you, my beautiful dark romance family. If this story grabbed you by the throat and didn't let go, smash that like button until it breaks. Seriously. Let YouTube know that we want more stories about women who refuse to break, about love that's dangerous and real, about justice that comes with bloodied knuckles. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and hit that notification bell so you never miss when we drop the next story. Because, trust me, we're just getting started. We've got more dangerous men, more fearless women, and more high-stakes love stories waiting in the shadows. Drop a comment below and tell me, would you have stepped into that ring with Yango? Or would you have chosen differently? What would you have done with Elias? Quick death or slow justice? And most importantly, what's your story of refusing to stay down when life tried to break you? I read every single comment.
Every story you share.
Every piece of your journey. This community isn't just about watching these tales unfold. It's about recognizing ourselves in characters like Rose. It's about knowing we're not alone in our fights, our darkness, or our refusal to accept anything less than we deserve. Share this video with someone who needs to hear Rose's story. That friend who's been playing small. That sister who's been accepting less than she's worth. That person in your life who needs a reminder that they're stronger than whatever's trying to break them. And if you want to go deeper, if you want exclusive content, behind-the-scenes looks at how these stories come together, and early access to new chapters, check out the link in the description for our Patreon community. That's where the real magic happens. Remember, my fierce hearts, the world will always offer you the choice. Apologize on your knees, or step into the ring. Choose the ring. Choose the fight. Choose to become the kind of person who makes empires bow. Until next time, stay dangerous, stay dreaming, and never forget, you're not here to serve the powerful. You're here to become them. This is your Queen of Dark Romance signing off. Now go take your kingdom.